and turn the time over to Tim and Mandy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim DePack, and I'm from Winsor Newton, and I'll be your moderator for today's class. I'd like to welcome you all to today's class, which is a Winsor Newton Robin's Eggs wall art. And this is the second class in our Birds of a Feather series of classes, which will be running every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central Time throughout the month of April. I'm also being joined by Mandy Peltier, who will be your artist instructor for today's class, as well as the rest of the classes within the series. And Mandy will be taking you through today's class by providing information about the products being used and showing you how to perform some of her favorite watercolor painting techniques, all while creating this cup-styled nest along with the eggs using the Winsor Newton Cotman Sketcher box set, along with Winsor Newton masking fluid. She'll also show you her upcoming pieces coming for the rest of the series of her classes for the remainder of the month. We'll put the link, as it's already in there from Maddie, for the sketch outline. If you haven't got that already, the link is there for you to do that. And upon completion of the class, there's going to be a survey that you're going to get in your email. We please like to ask you to fill that out and let us know what you think about the class and how we've done. And if there's any type of future projects and you'd like to see Mandy complete. The class will be replayed in 24 hours on michaels.com and Michael's YouTube channel. Please feel free to paint along with Mandy or sit back, relax, and enjoy the class. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Mandy.
All right, thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our Birds of a Feather series. Last week we painted feathers, and today I'm going to show you how to paint, or at least one way to paint a bird's nest with robin's eggs inside of it. So because we only have an hour, I'll go ahead and share my other camera so we can just get going on this project. All right, so I have an overhead view of all of the supplies. I have a glass of water, Sketchers Pocket Box set. I have a 10-well palette today. We are mixing a lot more colors today than what I've been doing in some of my more recent classes. We've mixed a lot before, but it has just been a while. But for this class and then the next 2 classes, we'll be using the larger palette. I have art masking fluid. This is vital for the technique I'm showing today because we're going to isolate layers, and I'll explain the technique in a minute, but art masking fluid, we've used this in a lot of my classes before. I do have a heat gun just to sort of speed up the drying process because we're going to be applying lots of layers and drying in between each layer. You can also use a hair dryer. I actually have my hair dryer on the floor next to me because one time while I was practicing this class, this overheated and stopped working. So just in case that happens today, I may bust out the hair dryer so that we can finish along. So they both work. And then I am only using a number 4 brush today. I just happen to have 2 here because I'm going to use an older, bad looking number 4 brush to mix my colors with. And then I have a pencil and an eraser for drawing the outline. The outline is quick and easy today, so that's good news. And then I have a Q-tip and a toothpick for applying art masking fluid. We're going to be using both today. If you don't have a toothpick or a Q-tip, you can use the bottom or the wrong side of the watercolor brush. I've done that before in a pinch when I dropped my toothpick or Q-tip and couldn't find it, and this did work fine. So you can just use that, and then you can just peel it off when it dries. And then I'm using 100% cotton cold pressed watercolor paper, Winsor Newton professional brand. And I'll just hold up the finished project up close so you can see this. This class has been a long time coming. Tim and I were just talking about this. I actually made this class, I want to say in February of last year. So I'm really excited to finally get a chance to teach it to you all today. Okay, so we're going to start today, just like we do all my other classes, by sketching the outline. So I'm going to set a few things aside so they don't get in my way. And I'm going to pull over the outline because it's easier for me to draw the outline if I'm looking at the sketch versus the final drawing. All right, so I think this outline looks kind of funny because I think it looks like a broken egg with whole eggs in the middle, like where the yolk is. I think that's what it looks like, eggs within an egg. So I'm going to draw what I'm going to call the yolk first. It's that smaller middle circle. And it doesn't have to be a perfect looking circle. You can tell they're kind of jagged edges. It's just sort of a guide for me of where I'm going to be placing all of my strokes that will serve as the twigs. So I'm just going to sort of draw a loose shaped small circle, smallish circle. It really doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to have about 1 inch spacing above that and then draw a larger circle around it. Again, this is really just a guide. You don't even need these circles. I just wanted to give you something to sort of aid you today. And then inside the yolk, I'm going to draw the 3 whole eggs, which are sort of ovals with a somewhat pointed bottom. So I'm just going to sort of follow my outline as a guide. I'm gonna kind of start by sketching in a rough shape of them, and then I may sort of carve them out further with my pencil to get them to look more like what I have on my outline here. Actually, it's probably the fastest I've drawn these eggs. So I'll just slow down and sort of play around with them to give you guys just a chance to keep up with me. But if I move too fast today, just know you can always watch the replay when it's uploaded to the Michael Store YouTube channel tomorrow. And you can pause as needed to better keep up. So that is the good news about these classes. You can always catch the replay. And then I also provide written directions for my classes to kind of help you follow along a little better too if you're making this on your own time after the fact. They help me too, having the written directions, because it helps me. I do these classes so far in advance. Having the written directions help me remember what I did and what technique I used. So all right, we're going to apply the art masking fluid now to the eggs. It's going to be a lot easier to apply all the strokes we're going to put on for the twigs if we just block out the eggs now and protect them from receiving any paint. And that's exactly what our art masking fluid does. It lifts very easily off the paper, but protects the paper wherever you put it from absorbing or receiving paint. So we'll save the eggs. We'll paint those on actually last. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up my bottle. And I'm going to pour art masking fluid into the cap when we use it for the twigs, but for the eggs, I'm just going to use the Q-tip and just put it into the bottle itself. And I'm going to use the Q-tip like a brush and just sort of paint over the eggs with the art masking fluid. And I'm already making a mess. I've already spilled a little bit of masking fluid on the table. So not a big deal when it dries. I can just rub it right off. I didn't have the cap screwed on all the way, so I could easily take it off for the class, but apparently I tilted it and some came out. But that's me. I've told you all before, I'm very clumsy. All right, and then we'll let this masking fluid dry while we mix all of our paint colors. But subsequent masking fluid we use, we'll need to use the heat gun to sort of speed along the drying process. So if you don't have a heat gun or a hair dryer, you can just watch today and then complete this on your own time and wait for each layer to dry on its own. You'll get the same results. We're just sort of speeding things up today. All right. So I'm going to set this aside so it can dry along with the outline. And I'm going to pull over my larger palette. I have to wipe this masking fluid I spilled off my fingers. All right, and my Sketchers pocket set, my glass of water, my older number 4 brush that I keep to use for mixing colors. I'm going to set my toothpick aside in a safe place because I need that for the twigs. All right, and then paper towels for blotting. So I'm going to start by just swishing my brush into the water and just getting those bristles nice and wet. And I do this technique in all of my classes. So if you've been to my classes before, you know what I'm about to say. I'm going to place 3 scoops of water into 10 wells on my palette. So my palette happens to have 10 wells on the outer ring. So into each of those outer wells, I'm going to place 3 scoops of water. I'm going to do that by using my brush, just like if it were a spoon. And I'm just going to scoop water out. I'm going to hold my brush over the well and sort of shake the brush. And that deposits the water that's on the brush. And I'm going to repeat that 3 times into each well. And it's okay if you get a little bit more water in there, a little bit less, but this should help us all achieve the same paint to water ratio for each color that we're going to mix. And usually I can't multitask, but for some reason with this, I can talk to you all and count the scoops for each well. But trust me, I usually can't multitask in life. It's hard to do 2 things at once. All right, so we're basically going to be creating a gradient of browns for our colors today. So we're going to start with a light brown and work all the way to a really dark brown, even black. So we will be mixing a lot of colors today, but most of them are going to be various hues of brown, various values of brown. So we'll start with the lightest brown. It's actually more of a beige or sort of a camel color. And we're going to do that by mixing yellow ochre, which is the yellow on the bottom row, burnt umber, which is the dark brown on the bottom row, and then white, which is far right bottom row. And I'm going to explain to you the ratios. So it's basically going to be 1 pass of yellow ochre, 1 pass of burnt umber, and then as much white as we need to lighten it. Actually, I think we'll do 2 passes of yellow ochre. So 2 passes yellow ochre, 1 pass burnt umber, and then probably 3 to 4 passes of white. And when I say pass, what I mean is I'm going to take my wet brush. I'm going to just run it over that half pan for a second or so, stir it into the first well with 3 drops or 3 scoops of water, wipe it on the edge of the palette so I can release the excess paint on my brush, and that's 1 pass. I usually do it a little bit faster than that. This doesn't need to be a slow process. So I'm going to repeat that one more time for yellow ochre. So 2 passes of yellow ochre. And then I'm going to do 1 pass of burnt umber. And that just sort of darkens it up just a little. And then I'm going to go ahead and clean and blot my brush before I go in with white. And I'm going to add, 3 to 4 passes of white. I just want to lighten this up, have it be at least an equal paint to water ratio, and just kind of make it a light camel / beige color. So I think I'm probably going to need to do 4 passes. All right. So hopefully you can see over camera the value there. It's just a light kind of beige color. And that'll be our lightest brown that we use. I know you might argue it's more of a yellow, but we're just going to call it a light value of brown today. And then we're going to go just a little bit darker, and we're going to mix a yellow brown now. We're going to use 2 of the 3 colors we used for beige. So we use yellow ochre, burnt umber, and Chinese white for beige. For the yellow brown, we're just going to use yellow ochre and burnt umber. We're going to use them in equal amounts. So I'm going to do 3 passes of each, 3 passes of yellow ochre, 3 passes of burnt umber. This is going to give us like a spicy brown mustard color. So 3 passes yellow ochre, 3 passes burnt umber, and we'll get ourselves a spicy brown mustard color. And we'll be using 2 to 3 colors at a time for each layer. So, and I'll make sure to point out which colors we're mixing. We're kind of mixing them in order of how we're going to use them as well. All right, so there's our spicy brown mustard color, equal parts yellow ochre, burnt umber. And I'll take it easy on you for the next 2 colors. We'll just use 1 color for the next 2. We're going to next mix burnt umber only. So burnt umber only, and that is the dark brown we use. So I'm going to do 6 passes of burnt umber. See, I'm doing this pretty quickly here as I do these passes. That's also why I use an old brush. I don't have to worry about being rough as I run my brush into those half pans, because this brush isn't one that I would paint with anymore. All right, and then after you're done with burnt umber, the next color will be burnt sienna, just burnt sienna. So like I said, I'm taking it easy on you. These next 2 colors here, just having to work with 1 half pan is always nice. But it is also nice to learn how to use this palette in a curated manner and learn how to mix lots of different colors with the limited palette you have. All right. So that's just burnt sienna, which is sort of the red-brown, and you're set. Okay, and now the next 3 colors we're going to mix use the same 2 colors. They use ultramarine blue and burnt umber, which are right on top of each other on your Sketchers pocket set. But we're going to mix them using varying ratios. So actually give us 3 different hues or 3 different colors, even though we're using the same 2 colors to create them. So this will also show you how, depending on what ratio you use, you'll yield a different hue. So the first one we're going to mix is a dark brown. So it's going to be a lot of burnt umber and then enough ultramarine blue to turn it dark brown. So I'm going to start off with 4 passes of burnt umber, and then I'll add to it 2 passes of ultramarine blue, and we'll see where we're at. So I'm going to start with the burnt umber because I'm mixing a dark brown. So I just want it to be much darker than this color where it's just burnt umber. And the ultramarine blue darkens it. So I'm doing 4 passes burnt umber, and then I'm going to add 2 passes of ultramarine blue, because usually I do about 6 passes into each well. Sometimes it varies. And that is a much darker brown than what we just mixed, but I actually think we're going to add 1 more pass of ultramarine blue and make a nice, really dark, deep brown. So I ended up with 4 passes burnt umber, 3 passes ultramarine blue to get to a dark brown. And then we're going to mix black next using the same 2 colors. You would think black would be equal parts burnt umber and ultramarine blue, but I have found I need a bit more ultramarine blue than burnt umber in order to mix a black. So I'll start with 2 passes of each, and then I'll kind of gauge what color I have from there. So I'll show you what I mean. I'll start with 2 passes of each into the next well on the palette here. And it'll probably get me pretty close to the color I just mixed. Yeah, it does. So it's like a really dark brown. So if it looks brown after mixing 2 passes of each, you'll need to add more blue. If yours happens to look navy after doing equal passes, then you'll actually want to add a little bit more brown. But I have to sort of play back and forth. And I just find, for me, I guess the pressure I use as I mix colors, I just find I need a little bit more blue than I need brown. All right, so black was mixed with same 2 colors, just differing ratios. And then we're going to mix one more color using those 2 half pans. We're going to mix in navy now. So navy is going to be a lot of blue and a little bit of burnt umber. So I'm going to start with 4 passes of ultramarine blue. So again, different ratios here, yielding different hues. So 4 passes ultramarine blue, and then I'm going to add 1 to 2 passes of burnt umber to it to get us to a nice navy color. So yes, I think I would need 2 passes of burnt umber myself, but if after 2 passes it actually looks too dark or even a little brown, just add a little more blue to it, and that will pull it to the navy family. All right, so 3 colors. I'll use burnt umber and ultramarine blue, just different ratios. All right. The next 2 colors we're going to mix are for our eggs. Actually, this navy is for our eggs as well, but we're going to mix 2 turquoise colors, one that is just a true turquoise and one that's maybe a lighter turquoise. I love turquoise. It's probably the reason I chose robin's eggs for the bird's nest. They're just such a bright, pretty color. So to mix the turquoise color, I'm going to mix equal parts ultramarine blue and Viridian green, which is the bottom row far left. So ultramarine blue and Viridian hue or Viridian green, bottom row far left. I'm going to do equal passes of both. So 3 passes of both. I'll start with 3 passes of ultramarine blue, but you can start with Viridian hue if you want. It doesn't really matter which one you start with since we're doing equal passes. But I'm doing equal passes, Viridian hue and ultramarine blue. I like my turquoises to be a touch more on the blue side than the green side. So after mixing equal parts of both, you can kind of look at your turquoise and see if you want to add a little more blue or a little more green. I think mine looks pretty good, but it might still be a bit watery. So I'm going to add maybe just a half pass more of each. All right. And then you don't need to clean your brush after mixing turquoise, equal parts ultramarine blue and Viridian hue. Since the next color we're going to mix is just a lighter version of the turquoise, I'm just going to take my brush with the paint on it and stir it into the next well. And then I'll wipe my brush on the edge of the palette, and I'm going to stir my brush back into the turquoise we just mixed, and then stir that into the water. That has sort of a wash now of the same color we mixed of the turquoise. That saves us a little bit of time. We don't have to then mix more ultramarine blue and Viridian hue into this new color. And we still have plenty of turquoise to paint the eggs with. And then to this next well where we added sort of 2 scoops of the turquoise paint, I'm just going to add 4 passes or so of Chinese white. I want to say something real quick. So I have some beige on my white half pan. Do you guys see that? So if I were to put this directly into this new turquoise color I'm mixing, it could affect the hue a little bit. So I can just quickly clean it by taking a wet brush and just running it over that white, swishing my brush, running it over that white until all the yellow is removed. And then I've cleaned my half pan. And now I can go into that white and stir it into this turquoise without having to worry about that yellow influencing the color at all. You can also take a damp paper towel and wipe it over any color that's not where it belongs. All right, so you can see that white has lightened it up and given us a lighter turquoise color, which is really pretty. All right, and now we're going to mix a neutral gray color. So neutral gray, what I'm going to do is where you mixed black. So black was in between the burnt umber, and the navy. I'm going to stir a clean brush into the black and then stir that into the well with the last well with 3 scoops of water. This also cuts down on time. And then after I've stirred my brush into the black and then stirred that into the last well with 3 scoops of water, I'm going to add white to it. I'm going to clean my white again real quick so I don't put blue into the black, although blue was used to mix the black, so it probably wouldn't be the end of the world. And then I'm going to add to that 4 or so passes of Chinese white, maybe 5. I'm going to go with 5. I want a middle value gray, and actually this is a little light, so I'm going to clean and blot my brush and just put a little bit more black in there. There we go. Perfect. And that has given me a middle value gray. When you think of just a baseline gray, not a dark gray, not a light gray, just a middle gray. That's what I'm going for. Okay, so we have one more to mix, but it's a wash. So we want it to be a lot more watery, and we're just going to pull from 2 colors that are already in our palette that we've mixed. So into my center well, I happen to have 2 center wells, but you should only have 1, or you likely only have 1. And if you're out of wells, you can always use one of the wells on your Sketchers pocket set as well. But I'm going to place 6 scoops of water into my center well, 6 scoops, because we want this to be an extra watery mixture. And if you end up doing a little more than 6, that's okay. Not a big deal. All right. And then I'm going to stir my brush into the lighter turquoise we mixed. So stir your brush into the lighter turquoise and then stir that into those 6 scoops of water. And then I'm going to quickly swoosh and blot my brush. And I'm going to stir my brush into that gray I mixed and stir that into the wash. So it kind of creates a cool gray wash that we'll use as sort of the cast shadow for our egg's nest. All right, so 6 scoops of water, a stir of the lighter turquoise, and a stir of the gray. And then we're ready to get going. I'll quickly explain the process, because if you can believe it or not, we're almost halfway through our class time. So I'm going to make sure my eggs are dry. They are, other than this masking fluid mess I made, but I can remove that quite easily with a paper towel. So let me quickly explain the process. So this first layer we're going to do is we're just going to use 3 colors to establish the first set of twigs and the cast shadow. And then we're going to dry that with our heat gun. And then we're going to apply masking fluid to some of the twigs. And I'll explain why when we get there. We're just going to be applying paint, drying that, applying masking fluid, drying that, paint, dry, masking fluid, dry, paint. So it's going to be several layers. And then when we remove the masking fluid, it's going to reveal lots of colors and layers of twigs. Okay, so that's the basic premise to this project here. All right, so let me remove this masking fluid that's smudged there. And we're going to start with 3 colors for this very first layer. Every other layer we'll just use 2, but this first layer we're going to use 3. We're going to use the lighter beige color. We're going to use that gray we mixed towards the end and our wash. So I've switched to my nicer number 4 brush. I'm going to swish that in the water, get it wet. And how we're going to apply our twigs is just kind of curvy C-shaped strokes. I'm not going to try and do a continuous circle around the bird's nest. I want to really break them up. And while I want to, for the most part, follow the curvature of the bird's nest, I might deviate at times and go up or go kind of round and just do some fun things. But for the most part, I'm going to follow the curvature of the nest. So I'm going to start with the beige color, that lightest brown we mixed. And I'll use the tip of my brush, but at times I might press a little bit down onto the side and then lift again. So we get sort of different thicknesses. But you can start wherever you want on the bird's nest. I'm just going to sort of take it and twist and lift. So I'll show that you see that up close. And you can crisscross a little, you can overlap. But I'm just going to sort of work my way all the way around. This first layer will be the longest layer because you're kind of establishing everything. And you might even question yourself a little bit what you're doing and if you're doing it right. So we're just going to place lots of curvy sort of C-shaped strokes, some inverted C's, depending on what side of the bird's nest you're working on. I'm overlapping. I'm using the side of my brush, the tip of my brush to create different thicknesses on each particular twig. You can also apply strokes through the center of the bird's nest. You can go right over the eggs, and that masking fluid is going to keep them from receiving paint. So that can help you just continue your kind of stroke, if you will, and not worry about getting any paint where the turquoise paint is going to go. So I like to put the most beige down. I'll use less of every other color. The beige I like to really do a lot of because I think it adds those lighter tones to the finished bird's nest, which is nice. So I might go outside of the outline just a few times to apply just some looser, crazier looking twigs. But for the most part, I'm going to sort of use that outer circle as a guide for me, because when we're done doing all these layers, we'll have some time to play with the twigs and make some adjustments, and we can always add more of other colors then. But I'm not trying to cover all of the white of the paper. You can see from mine, there's still plenty of white from the paper showing. I'm just sort of doing an initial sort of coverage of this color. All right, so I think this is probably enough beige for this first layer, because like I said, I can always add more later, but this is a nice good start for us to kind of start from or work from. And of course I say that, and then I'm just sort of playing some more. You can just keep playing and playing and playing. This is a fun technique and you guys can just take it and run with it. But I am going to clean my brush now to stop myself, blot it on my paper towel. And now we're going to apply a little bit of neutral gray. If you look at my finished piece, you can see some neutral gray a little bit up here. That's all the neutral gray, but I'm mostly going to do it along the bottom because I kind of want the bottom part of the nest to be a little bit darker than the rest of the nest. It may not work out that way, but I always try. So I'm going to just put a little bit of gray on my brush. I'm going to go right over the beige. I'm not going to worry about if the two colors bleed into each other where they still might be wet. That's fine. And while I may put a few up top and on the left and right side, I'm mostly going to apply it sort of along the bottom. And again, I'm not going to worry about the beige and the gray bleeding into each other, creating some new shades or hues or colors. And it's okay to apply a few along the top and sides too, but I'm just going to mostly sort of apply them along the bottom. All right, and not as much gray as what I did beige. I'm going to be a little more, I guess, conservative with the gray. A little bit more restraint. In fact, I think what I have is about as much as I want. So I can always add more later because we're going to remove the masking fluid and make some adjustments towards the end of class. So I think that's good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that wash I mixed to apply the cast shadow. So you can see that light blue cast shadow down here. I'm going to add a little bit of this to any negative space that's still showing in between the beige and the gray along the very bottom of the bird's nest, where I'm sort of wiping my brush back and forth on this finished painting. And then I'm going to put it along the bottom. So I only want it on the bottom. I'm not going to add any of the wash along the top or sides, just along the very bottom. So I think I'll start by applying it underneath the bird's nest. I'm trying to get this so you can see both. So I might start here and just sort of applying it. I'm going to make these thicker since it's supposed to be a cast shadow and not actual twigs. So it's okay to really press your brush into the paper to apply this color. And I'm not really going to worry if the blue bleeds in with the gray or beige. That's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not going to ruin anything, I promise, because we still have some layers to go here. And then I had mentioned I'm going to fill in some of the negative space along the bottom of the bird's nest. So I'm going to do that now. I'm just going to sort of fill in some of those shapes. They'll probably get covered by other branches and twigs, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of blotch paint into those negative space sections. It's not going to fully erase the twigs I've already added, so you don't need to worry about that happening. I'm kind of being loose with my coverage here. And you can even use that sort of what I call the scribble scrabble stroke to just sort of apply some of the cast shadow along the bottom. And you can always apply more of this towards the end. I just sort of like to do it first thing because I think it already gives the bird's nest life by putting it in now. And it kind of helps you remember we want the bottom to be a little bit darker so that it kind of matches up with the cast shadow. All right, so that's our first layer. I'm going to now take my heat gun. If you have a heat gun, try not to hold it towards the fan. It can be real tempting. I know I do that. And then I usually will rest it in my lap after. And I think that's what causes it to overheat. So try to hold it away from the fan. And then when you're done, don't put it on your lap. Don't do what I've done. Set it on the table. And we're just going to make sure that this layer is nice and dry. And then we're going to add our first layer of masking fluid to the twigs of the bird's nest. And what the twigs are going to do, these little twigs we're going to apply with our masking fluid, is they're going to protect some of the beige we've already applied, so that when we peel it off at the end, that beige will still shine through where we've applied the masking fluid. And this won't be the only layer where we apply masking fluid, so it'll sort of be a buildup of parts of the twigs being isolated to kind of create that multi-layered look for the bird's nest. All right, so I think that's dry enough. So I am going to get my masking fluid back out, open it up. I am going to pour some of this into the cap this time. I just find it easier to work with when I'm working from the cap versus from the bottle for the most part. I'm going to set this aside into a very safe place where I'm not going to knock it over while I'm working. I have done that before and it makes a mess. I'm going to use my toothpick. I'm going to start by just moving it up and down in the masking fluid just to sort of build up a base of masking fluid on the toothpick. You will not be able to get as long of a stroke using masking fluid on the toothpick as you're able to do with the brush, and they may go on a little thick. That's okay. If it kind of goes down in a puddle, you can kind of pull from that puddle to maneuver the masking fluid around. But I'm basically just going to apply it sort of randomly all over the bird's nest, still following that same style of stroke, even though they're not going to be quite as long. Like I said, because we're using a toothpick, not a brush, and we're working masking fluid, not watercolor. But I'm just kind of trying to isolate some of the twigs and color, and it will isolate some of the paper as well, the white of the paper, since we still have a lot of the white of the paper shining through. That was a tongue twister. You can overlap some of your masking fluid strokes. I don't have a lot going on in the middle right now, so I probably won't apply a lot of masking fluid to the middle, just sort of the outer rings. And I probably apply the most masking fluid to this very first layer, but you can see I'm just dipping my toothpick, and then as the toothpick kind of builds up a layer of masking fluid on the tip, makes it a little bit easier to control and maneuver it around. All right, I think that is probably enough masking fluid for me. I don't know if you guys can see it under the camera because it is hard to see the masking fluid. I maybe put 20 or so strokes of this on there. I wasn't counting, but I just sort of spread them evenly all around the twigs on the bird's nest. And then I'm going to now dry this with my heat gun. And the masking fluid kind of dulls or darkens when it's dry. So that kind of can give you a good gauge of when it's dry with your heat gun. It may bubble up too if you kind of cook the masking fluid, and don't worry, that's not going to hurt anything if you get too close with your heat gun or something. I think it's kind of fun when it does that. I might have sensory issues. All right. I think that's probably good and dry, so I'm going to turn that off, set it down, not in my lap. All right, so we're ready for the next layer here. We are going to apply our, what I called the spicy brown mustard color and burnt umber to the nest, both of these colors. And we're just gonna apply them sort of all around. I'll probably do more of the burnt umber in the middle of the nest because I do want to start building up the darkness of the middle of the nest. So I'm gonna make sure my brush is clean. I'm gonna start with the spicy brown mustard, and I'm just gonna continue with my little curved strokes going all the way around the nest, overlapping. You can do some that sort of go off and change directions, but for the most part, you know, follow the curvature of the nest. Let's work our way all around. And again, don't neglect the middle. I'll do a little bit of the spicy brown mustard shade in the middle, but we'll really tackle the middle with the darker brown colors. But it's fun to have a few lighter colors in there that we can kind of isolate and cover with that masking fluid so that they show at the end. Remember, you can use the tip of your brush, the side of your brush, use it all to get different strokes and movement. And the reason we want to dry the masking fluid is if we were to go over the masking fluid with wet paint, it would get our brushes gunky and it's hard to get out. So we definitely want to make sure the masking fluid is dry before you go over. All right, I think that is probably enough spicy brown mustard for me. So I'm going to clean my brush, blot it, and I'm going to move on to the color we mix that's only burnt umber. And I'm going to start in the middle. Make sure I get some paint in the middle. So right in the very middle, I'm just adding like crazy strokes because it's kind of hard to do a curve right in the middle there. And I'll sort of work my way around with the brown all the way around. I think this is kind of an arm workout, this technique. Maybe I'm just sore from my previous workout, but I can feel it in my shoulder. All right, working my way around. This is actually a quicker technique than you might think. I think it helps that we are speeding it along with the heat gun, but I do think this is a quicker thing than you might think looking at the finished picture. The finished picture, I think, makes it look harder and longer than what it actually is. I might add a little stroke, connect that to the spicy brown mustard. I just like to make a few every so often that sort of go outside of the general contours of the bird's nest, because I think it adds some lively movement to the bird's nest and some interest, some visual interest. All right, I think that is good. I've added enough of the burnt umber color. So we are ready to use the heat gun. All right, so I'm going to turn on my heat gun. I'm going to dry this. I want to make sure the paint is dry before I go over my painting with more masking fluid. And we're going to repeat the same process with the masking fluid, just adding little markings with the masking fluid to block off. Now it will not only be the beige and the gray from the first layer, it will now be that spicy brown mustard color and the burnt umber. So we're going to be isolating more colors so that more is visible when we remove the masking fluid here in just a little bit. And if your paper curls up a little, don't worry, it's just because it's hot. It'll flatten very easily on its own here. All right, I think that's dry. And then I'm going to pull my masking fluid again. And I'm just going to go over. I mean, don't neglect the very middle. You can add some masking fluid to the very center of the bird's nest too. And I'm just going to add a few more strokes. Crisscross any previous masking fluid that you applied in the last step. I don't think I'll apply as much masking fluid in this layer as I did the very first layer. I think I did close to 20 last time. I may do, I don't know, 10 to 15 this time. It's all, you know, you just kind of eyeball it, and when you feel good, it's done. I just try to kind of spread them out pretty evenly. And if any white of the paper is still showing through when we remove the masking fluid, it's real easy to cover that. I'll cover that today, how to do that. But I do try to keep my masking fluid strokes just where I've applied the twigs. There's no point in going on to the white of the paper out here. Just where the twigs are. All right, I think that's probably enough there. So I'm gonna dry my heat gun. My heat gun is getting a workout today. Masking fluid dries really fast on its own. If you don't have a heat gun, I mean, depending on how thick you put it on, I mean, it dries really fast, which is nice. You don't have to wait long if you don't want to force dry it. Okay. So we're going to continue through our journey of light value to dark value. So in this particular layer, we are going to use the burnt sienna color and the dark brown color. I'm going to start with the burnt sienna. Now the burnt sienna is not really necessary. Just orange and turquoise are complementary colors on the color wheel. And so when I initially made this without any burnt sienna, and I just felt like it needs some orange to pull out the blue just to complement. And so that's why we have the burnt sienna in there. So I apply it somewhat sparingly. It's just to kind of add that pop of orange to complement the blue of the eggs. So I will focus more heavily on the dark brown, but I just wanted to explain why we are using burnt umber, or not, I cannot speak, burnt sienna, the orangish brown shade in your set. That is really pretty, and I use a lot in my classes and in my own personal art. Has a lot of uses. All right, so that's probably enough burnt sienna, and I can always add more when we're all done, but I'm going to switch to the dark brown. I'm going to really focus the dark brown on the middle of the bird's nest because I really want the middle of the bird's nest to be dark. So I'm going to place lots of strokes of the dark brown. We're going to apply black to the center too, but I want to make sure I have a nice base of dark brown here. And I'll probably apply a little bit of dark brown along the very bottom of the nest too, because I had mentioned I'd like for that to be darker. So it makes sense when you're looking at the cast shadow. It doesn't always work out that way, but with this technique, you can just get away from yourself because it's just so fun to apply these strokes and masking fluid and dry and repeat. So it's okay if it doesn't work out that way, but I want to try and have the bottom be a little bit darker than the tops and the side. Few wayward twigs, always nice, like I said. Visual interest. A lot of colors going on with this bird's nest. But if you look at a real bird's nest, man, birds source from a lot of different places to make their nests. So they can be colorful, even if in the same color family, they can still be quite colorful. All right, I think that's enough dark brown. So I'm going to use my heat gun and dry the burnt sienna and the dark brown I just applied. We are going to apply one more layer of masking fluid, but I'm only going to apply it to the center of the nest. I'm kind of preparing the way for the black we're going to add. So we're only going to add black to the very center to darken or make the bird's nest look set down, the egg set down into the nest. So for this last layer of masking fluid, I'm only going to apply it to the very center. So I guess theoretically speaking, you really only need to make sure the center of the bird's nest is dry. I think mine is, so I'll go ahead and turn that off. And then I'm just going to apply some masking fluid to the very center of the bird's nest only. So I'm going to do maybe slightly smaller strokes since I'm dealing with a smaller area. I can get this to cooperate here. I'm at a drafting table, so sometimes things roll on me. It's not ideal. All right, so just a few, maybe 6 to 7 strokes. I don't need a lot. I just want to block off some of that dark brown. All right, that's good. And we're done with the masking fluid. So I'm going to pour what's in the cap back into the bottle. I forgot one day after I practiced and I came back in the next day and the bottle was still open. I was thankful it wasn't all dry. So, all right, set that aside and then I'm going to dry the masking fluid. And make sure the masking fluid is good and dry here because we're close to removing it. After the masking fluid in the center is dry, I'm just going to add some black to the center of the bird's nest, only to the center. I'm not going to add it to the outer areas. If you feel like something needs black, you can always add it later. So I'm just going to focus on the center of the bird's nest and just add black. Same little curvy hatching stroke, or it's kind of a hatching stroke because you're sort of doing a curvy stroke, lifting your brush in between each stroke. I don't, curvy hatch and stroke, I may have just invented a new stroke there. All right, sort of a fun stroke. All right, so that's probably enough black just right there in the very center of the nest to set those eggs down into it. And then I'm going to dry it with my heat gun. And this is the one where you do want to make sure it's dry because we're going to remove the masking fluid. And so if you have any wet paint on your bird's nest and then you remove your masking fluid with wet paint, you'll smear that wet paint, which you may not want. So make sure this particular layer is dry, whether you're doing it along with me now or you're watching and are planning on doing this after the fact. Sort of touch it a little bit with my fingers, make sure I got it all. All right. And while you can use your fingers to remove the masking fluid, your skin does have oils that could smear or damage the paper. So I think fingers are easier because you can feel what you're doing, but I'll use good practice and use a clean paper towel here. And I'm just going to rub away all of the masking fluid on the eggs and on the nest. I probably will end up using my fingers to make sure I didn't miss anything. Kind of run your hand over, make sure you didn't miss any of that masking fluid. And this is a fun part because you can kind of see what everything we've done up to this point has resulted in as far as showing all the various layers of twigs we applied and how we isolated some of that with the masking fluid. It's just fun, 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 fun. And it's going to look a little rough at this point, but I'm going to show you how we can smooth things out. I mean, you can finish your bird's nest right now, just paint the eggs and call it a day. But I like to do, I'm never happy. So I like to fuss with it and tweak and do a little bit more to it than what we've already done. So I'm going to use my fingers now, just to make sure I didn't miss any masking fluid. And I didn't. I can peel off this little bit here that I spilled earlier and it comes off no problem. All right, so I want to get us started on the eggs because we may need to do 2 layers to the eggs or we may not, just kind of depends on time. You can do a second layer, repeating what we do for the first layer on your own time if you want to make them more saturated. But I'm going to take my number 4 brush. I'm going to make sure it's clean. I'm going to blot it. All right, and I'm going to use the lighter of the 2 turquoises. Put some of that on my brush. And to all 3 eggs, I'm just going to go around the edges of each egg with this turquoise color. I'm just going to go around the edging of every egg with this turquoise color. I mean, there are a million different ways you can paint these eggs. This is just how I'm doing it with you all today. So I'm just going to go around the edging. And then we've done this in a bunch of my classes where we create a diluted version of the color that's on our brush. We're going to do that today. All right, so after I've gone around the edging of each egg, I'm going to place my brush in the water for just a half a second, wipe it a few times on the edge of the glass, and then I'm going to fill in what's left of each egg with that diluted version of turquoise. And you can always place your brush back in the water if you need to. And it will kind of create a gradient where the edging on the eggs is a little bit darker than what's through the center. I'll hold that up so you can see. Kind of creates a gradient. Now, this is probably something you'll want to repeat a second time when this first layer dries, if you just want like a brighter looking blue. But depending on time, we only have 10 minutes left. We may not have time to do that together. And then while these eggs are still wet, I'm going to take the darker turquoise, and on the 2 eggs that are on the top, I'm going to go more thickly on the left side and more thinly on the right side. So I'm going to go more thickly along the left of each of these top 2 eggs with the darker turquoise color. And then I'll use just the tip of my brush to apply it along the right side edging. Okay. And if you get any water blooms, what you can do to fix that is you can clean your brush, blot it lots of times on your paper towel to release most of the water. And then you can just use that barely wet brush to sort of smooth. That is something you can do if needed. And then I'm on the very bottom egg. I'm going to apply the thicker stroke along the top and the thinner stroke along the bottom. And mine needs to transition just a little because that first turquoise has started to dry. So I wet my brush, I blotted it lots of times on the paper towel, and then I used it to kind of smooth. Okay. And then with that navy color, I'm just going to use the navy on the two top eggs on the left side. I'm allowing that navy to bleed into the turquoise. And I'm going to apply it along the top on the bottom egg. So left side of the two top eggs, the top of the very bottom egg. Same thing, any water blooms, wet your brush, blot it on a paper towel, and then you can use that to sort of smooth. But these eggs will need another layer of color to really pop out at us and look super robin's egg blue. All right, but I want to show you how to tweak your bird's nest. So you can still see a lot of negative space on those twigs, right? From all the layers we isolated, but I still think that looks so cool. All right, so beige is my favorite color here. It's probably the one I use the most. I like to use the beige to fill in some of the light twigs we see that just look like the white of the paper. But then one nice thing about watercolor is you can reactivate it. Even if it's dry on the paper, you can reactivate it and sort of play with it and push it to where you want it to go. You could call this a lift technique, or you could just call it reactivating, but I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to start by, you see this twig here that's pretty light in color. I'm going to start by kind of going over that with my beige, filling that in with color. Maybe I'll do this one over here too, that's right adjacent to it. But then I can also sort of play, if there's some negative space, like there's a little bit here, I can sort of just take my brush and just sort of wipe it over, and it sort of reactivates it. And then I can sort of push it and just sort of play around with it and create even new twigs. So it's sort of a wipe technique. I'm just sort of taking my brush and wiping, kind of creating new twigs, and then just sort of playing with them. And it even creates a new shade of brown because I'm kind of mixing that beige with all the other colors I've already applied. And as I sort of reactivate what's beneath, it mixes with the beige that's on my brush and then kind of creates even another shade of brown. So I'm going to do that where I kind of use my beige, fill in some of the lighter twigs, and maybe even push and pull and create some new twigs as well by reactivating some of the paint that's already on the paper from the different layers we applied. I'm going to be careful around the robin's eggs right now so that first layer can dry. I want to be mindful of time here. We have a few minutes left. And I want to make sure I show you my two coming classes. So you can use more than the beige. I just really like to start with the beige. You can always add more of any of the browns. But here's one I think I want to try and just wipe my brush gently on the paper to sort of create a new twig as I fill in some of the white space on the paper. Different paper allows you to lift a bit differently. I find 100% cotton paper is the best for reactivating pigment and sort of getting to push it around and play with it. So just keep that in mind. Different papers will do this more easily than others. So try different papers to find what works for you. I'll tell you the Winsor & Newton works great in this regard. I have no issues kind of pushing and playing with the paint. I do have still quite a bit of negative space near the eggs. So I think the eggs are probably dry enough now. You can always use your heat gun and dry them to take some of the dark brown or even the black. And I'm just going to sort of cover some of those twigs. And you can even carefully outline the edging of the eggs. If they didn't come clean off with the masking fluid, you can sort of form and shape them with either the dark umber or the dark brown and or the black. Carefully outline them to sort of crisp up those edges. There we go. And then let that dry before you add a second layer of paint to the eggs. I just want to make sure I get all that white space covered in the middle of the egg nest, because that's not where you want any white of the paper to still be visible. You do want that to be pretty dark. I might use a little bit of black there as well. All right, and then you can keep playing around with the bird's nest. So I put a little bit more beige. I see some white here. Go over that with the beige, maybe go over these two strokes. And then push and pull, I guess, is the technique. Reactivate, make new twigs. Fun technique. I'm going to dry these eggs real quick so I can show you the second layer for the eggs really fast. We have 4 minutes. I want to see at least what you're able to do with me. You might still want to play around with this a little bit after class is over. I would. You have to pull me away from these things. But I'm literally just going to basically do the same process I did the first time, where I'm going to take the teal, go around the edging. So repeat, and this just makes these eggs even brighter and more saturated. Brush in water, wipe along the sides, fill in the middle. And then I'll use the darker turquoise. The 2 top eggs, I do the left edging and just thin on the right. And I allow all the colors to bleed into each other. Create that transition. That bottom egg, I like to do a thicker line along the top, a thinner line along the bottom. And then I'll just use the navy just to darken up the darker sides here. You can always add even more light turquoise to the lighter part of the egg to sort of help it all come together. But you can see that these eggs are much more saturated by sort of repeating that first step. It makes them look much more like my finished example over here. So the eggs, do handle 2 layers well to make them a bit more saturated. And you can always take a clean brush that you've blotted on a paper towel and sort of wipe it through the middle of the egg to lift a little bit of paint to kind of reveal a highlight. Eggs are quite spherical, if you will. So it's nice to have a dark side, a middle value, and a highlight so it looks rounded. But then you can just keep kind of playing. I haven't really added any other colors to my bird's nest. I've just sort of been focused on the beige. So I'll add a little bit more spicy brown mustard. Just kind of work your way around. All right, so I think based on time, I should probably end there, but I could keep fiddling with this all day and reactivating paint, filling in some of that negative space. But I hope this has given you a general idea of how you can use masking fluid to create and isolate varying layers to really give you some texture, and to use it on something like twigs. You could use it on basket weaving, lots of different applications where you can use this multi-layer using mask fluid to block off multiple layer approach. So next week, a week from today, is the 3rd part of our series. It's these blue tits in a birdhouse. I'll show you how you can paint on wood grain pretty simply. And these birds are very simple. They don't take a lot of color and they're pretty loose looking. And then 2 weeks from today is this class, this yellow warbler. And this is the premium online class. So this is a free class. The blue tits is one of the free classes, just like today and just like last week. But in 2 weeks, we will be doing the premium online class. It's $20. It is a 90-minute class, and it is limited to 100 students. So it will be smaller, more intimate. You'll have time for more questions. And I think the background of this is really what is nice and fun, and you'll learn a lot doing that. So, all right. So with that, I'm going to share my other camera because I would love to see your bird's nests. All right. So if you were able to paint along with me, even if you're not done, if you want to hold up what you did so I can see. Ooh, look at these. Gorgeous. Oh, some of you did a great job adding the twigs outside. Oh, all that movement. That makes me really excited and happy. Awesome job, everyone. I'm just amazed every week when I ask you guys to hold up the work and I see it. It's just incredible. Feel free to tag me on social media or just to email me. Mandy Peltier Artist is my handle. And go to my website as well and email me if you're not on social media. You can find my email address on my website, mandypeltier.com. So I hope I see you next week and then the week after that. And if you missed the first part of this series, the video is on YouTube. So you can find it on the Michael Store YouTube channel, the Birds of a Feather, the feather class that we did last week. So thanks all for being here today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.